This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, today on the show we've got Heather Downing, and I connected with Heather through LinkedIn. The algorithm just kind of said, hey, this is somebody you should know. So I clicked on her image or whatever and went in and started reading about her bio, and I saw she had a talk about imposter syndrome. I think actually the talk of imposter syndrome is what showed up first. But I went there, I watched her talk, and I thought, wow, this fits perfectly with the things that we've talked about on the show when it comes to tech folks going through imposter syndrome as they're becoming leaders, and I thought it would be awesome to have her on. So I asked if she would come on the show, and graciously she said yes. So we have Heather on the show, and we start off the interview with me asking a little bit about her tech journey and how she got started in technology and where she's at now. So it's kind of a loaded question at the beginning, but that's how we got started, and hopefully you guys will enjoy this interview with Heather Downing.
Oh, wow. That's a great question. So I got started much later in life. So I got started at the age of 27. Before then, I did all sorts of things from retail to hotels. I mean, everything from working at Disneyland as a Jungle Cruise skipper, all the way up to doing front desk work. And after a while, I got very bored with that particular area. I had a full staff of people working for me, both in retail and in hotels. And one day I kind of had a little bit of a challenge from the IT guy that I kept restarting our computers when they would crash. And he's like, stop doing my job for me. And I said, well, I figured out, I just watched you a couple times, why is it such a big deal? He's like, well, if you think you're so good at this, then why don't you go off and do something in tech? And that statement, while he was just frustrated, actually stuck with me. And so years later, I ended up watching a movie that probably betrays a little bit of my age, but it was Tron Legacy came out, and I fell in love with the way that the CGI was done. And so I had some friends that were in the movie industry, and I asked them, how do they do the CGI? This is at the time, it was groundbreaking. And they said, oh, they just use this software program to do it. And I said, no, that's not really the question. How do they do CGI? How is CGI accomplished with computer programs? And I just kind of walked my way back from there, jumped into a boot camp that went for about 6 months called Centric Training, and emerged after doing an internship, and I've never looked back since. So that's kind of how I got started.
Awesome. And you mentioned to me before we started recording, that you do .NET development. What kind of applications are you working on these days?
Right. Well, right now I am a developer advocate for a identity management and security company right now. But for years, I spent time in all sorts of enterprise projects, everything from building back-end services for insurance companies and tax companies to working in the marketing industry and having to suddenly spin up a website in 6 weeks before the Super Bowl. And for the past 2 years, I've specifically been really interested in IoT and voice. I have 4 or 5 years of mobile development as well, but I do all of the voice work in .NET as well. So I spend a heavy amount of time doing API work.
So is that with Alexa skills and things like that when it comes to voice, or? Yep.
Alexa skills, same thing with Google Actions as well. I speak about that all over the world now. It's at the point where I think people are just curious as to whether or not they can really add voice to their business arsenal. And so they send all their developers to go learn about it. And I usually get pulled in Europe and Australasia for that as well. So that seems to have taken up a lot of my time. And then, of course, now I get to do a lot more enterprise-centric work for the company I currently work for.
Do you see a lot of people using IoT and voice internally in applications, or is it more just customer-facing?
I think it's customer-facing because most people don't like things that are complicated. Right now, I just finished setting up all of my new retirement portfolio stuff. And the reason that we use certain companies for that is because it makes it simpler, right? It's the same way with voice. Voice can do repetitive tasks a lot quicker and easier than even with mobile apps. So it's useful for things where you do them over and over, and you don't need to teach a user how to talk. They know how to say things. So it's helpful because they don't have a menu to learn. They just ask questions and get answers. So it tends to be more business to consumer than business to business. However, plenty of times I've been asked about, can I just like hook this into our Outlook and have it, reserve conference rooms internally and stuff like that? Absolutely, it can. And it can be very useful for that. I just noticed that if you want to actually, pour money into it, it seems to be B2C seems to be where it's at, but not always. You'd be surprised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see a lot of applications internally where, especially on the executive level, when you get up to some executives, they would rather just say, go do this, go do that. And they have assistants that do that today. Why not have virtual assistants that kind of, are not virtual assistants, but, technology like based algorithms that will go do those things for them when they ask for them.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I definitely see where that's coming.
We all want an assistant life, I think, in the future. I mean, why do you think we still have all of these movies that keep coming out with having those assistants? I mean, throw it all the way back to the original, like Star Trek. I mean, they talk to their ship's computer. So, it's the same. It's just an extension of an idea that we've had for over 60 years.
Yeah. And it's crazy to see like the newer generation. I have a 4-year-old and he was on his iPad and he had gotten Siri up and he was talking to Siri and he's like, so are you Siri or are you Alexa? Which one are you? And he was able to he understood that they were different, but that they both kind of did this similar things. And it was kind of crazy to think. I was like, how do you know you're 4? How do you know, what's going on here?
Well, but the barrier to entry though, with consuming any sort of technology that you can touch with your finger or speak and hear is so much lower, because we do that with kids from such a young age that you don't have to teach them about menus and stuff. But that's why iPads are like one of the easiest things for little kids to use, because they just see if they can draw with it. They see if they can touch things with it. And talking back and forth with a voice assistant is very natural. It feels just like a person that just isn't in the room,
Yeah.
Or like a telephone call, same thing. So they understand that it's a voice, or like when they watch television, it can be the same way. Probably one of the more successful areas has been education for voice, teaching words, teaching different concepts, playing games with it, because it encourages you to use more of your imagination visually, because you aren't looking at a screen, you're just talking. And so it actually really it has been helping children at an education level.
No, I totally get that, because I know my daughter, she was doing something and she's like, well, I'll just ask Siri. Yeah, she was trying to do her homework. She was stuck on something. She's like, I'll just go ask Siri how to do this. And during Black History Month, she was like researching about Frederick Douglass. I was like, well, just ask Siri. She'll pull up some videos. And then we started watching YouTube and going through those things. And it was really cool how it's all the world's knowledge is right there, and all you have to do is ask. It's quite amazing.
I can't agree more. Like, it's amazing that now knowledge is no longer gated. Even like even college level, you can still find the books on this. You can still find a YouTuber talking about it. You can still find, individual stuff all over the place for free. And really, if you don't know something, you can just go get the answer. And in fact, it can be tailor-made. You don't have to pore over shelves of books anymore. It's tailor-made to what you're specifically searching for. So now there really isn't any reason to be ignorant anymore, because if you don't know something, there's so many ways to discover that knowledge. Instead of going, oh, I don't know how to do this. Well, you can self-help. You can self-check out that knowledge. You don't need a person to lead you. It's kind of amazing. So really all we need to do is start teaching children how to look up and research things themselves. And that's when you'll really see them just take off.
Yeah, I agree. I think the excuse of I don't know how to do something is kind of out the window these days. I know I know you've done some photography stuff. I was looking on your website, and I'm dabbling with learning photography because my wife takes some good photos, and I'm terrible. Yeah. So like vacations, there's always great shots of me and terrible shots of her. So I was like, well, how do I do this thing in low light? So I just pull up YouTube and I'm like, oh, Peter McKinnon just taught me how to do something cool, really quickly. And it's pretty amazing how there's no more excuses, as long as you want to spend the time and effort into researching and finding it.
Ironically, technology people, specifically developers, are like some of the last people to go to the YouTube platform. It's very weird. Like there are a couple, but like there's not like the massive amount of us. Like there's a massive amount of beauty enthusiasts that will teach you how to do a cat eye, but yet there's only a couple of people who are really good at teaching what came out new in Swift. Like it's just weird that we, ironically, are like some of the last people to migrate there as a teaching tool. It's just interesting.
Yeah, I know. One of the guys we had on the show a while back, Kent C. Dodds, he just now kind of,
Kent.
Kent. Yeah, he just kind of went, I guess, full time now doing education through YouTube and things like that. And it's been amazing to see the growth that he's had going through that. As being one of the first ones out there doing some of the JavaScript, training that he's doing. It's been really good to see. So one of the things that really inspired me and got me excited about you is your talk on imposter syndrome. If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about what is imposter syndrome. I know we've talked about it before, but I want to hear your take on it and kind of some of the things that I know we all struggle, especially as like technology leaders, where we're all, going through this thing of, I'm going to get caught because I'm not really this thing that I say I am or that I pretend to be or whatever. So what is your take on imposter syndrome?
My take on it, so I don't get to read you the Wikipedia definition.
No. You
All right,
gotta give me your take on it.
My take on it is imposter syndrome is something that we all have inside of us. So we all have it to varying degrees, right? Everybody at one point in time will doubt the validity of the proof in front of them. So instead of it just being a confidence issue, it's actually a little bit more than that. It's that you are looking at proof of something that you had a hand in or you did or you accomplished, and you internally, somehow your brain is denying that that was really something you did. You just stumbled on it because you got lucky, or it was not really a big deal, and you believe these things. It's different to say it out loud and try to do the humble brag. This is more about you not accepting that you have taken a step up that hill, up that journey. You refuse to really look at it. And because of that, that can cause problems with taking on new work, additional work, with how you ask for raises, whether or not you ever do, whether or not you ask for a new position. All these things get affected because of how you see yourself in that light. So I think we all have that to varying degrees, but people with imposter syndrome have it chronically, tend to have it more. It just seems to pop up all the time, and something that you can surround yourself with friends, family, work, coworkers, whatever. And when you bring things up, they always are like, yeah, but you're awesome. Yeah, but you did this thing. And you don't accept that at all. There is a little bit of a line between your friends are just trying to cheer you up and whether or not you actually did provide value. Like those are two different things. Mm-hmm. But I think that imposter syndrome it's where you just do not feel like you deserve to be where you're at all. And it constantly creates anxiety and nervousness about continuing in that role because people are going to figure out that you have no idea what you're doing, And so that's my take on it. That's a little bit more English way of describing it, but hopefully.
No, that makes total sense. I know I suffer from it. I have to constantly remind myself, constantly work on thinking that I'm here because of the things that I've done to get here. And I always have this fear that one day HR is going to walk right through the door with a clipboard and be like, oh, we just realized that you really shouldn't be, leading this IT department. So you're going to have to get out of here, or you brought someone in that's more qualified or that knows what they're doing. That isn't trying to figure it out as you go. I'm kind of always assuming that. And I can remember back in, I put out my first iPhone app in 2010, and it was just a little stupid game. And somehow I got a bunch of downloads. I think at one point I had like 4 million downloads or something of it. And I was like, oh, wow, I got this app. And everybody's like, oh, can you build me an app? I'm like, no, I don't know what I'm doing. I just threw something together. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. They're like, can you help me build this? No, I didn't build apps for anybody else because I was like, I can't do it. I don't know what I'm doing. I just got lucky, and that's, exactly what you're talking about.
Well, that's how I felt about Angry Birds, right? Like, man, they just got lucky. Like all these people just decided it was cool. But really, there is a formula to the reason that people embraced it. There's a formula to the way that people embraced Pokemon Go. And the fact that they forgave it even after it screwed up, I want to point that out. If that company really didn't know what they were doing, after they screwed up and couldn't handle their load and were unfinished with their program, the people would have just dropped them and never gone back. But they got something right. Some part of their formula they got right. Like, that gameplay was pretty advanced for something that you could do on your phone with your kids. Like, that was amazing. And so even though they screwed up, they still have a loyal following and they get more every day. So, I don't know, the people that were there, how do you think they felt at the time? When they're like, oh, crap, we got all these people. We're not ready. We're not ready for this to happen. That's really where this gets triggered. Like, I wasn't ready to be asked to go overseas for the first time to speak internationally. I was not ready for that emotionally, meaning that regardless of whether or not I'm qualified or I have value, I emotionally and mentally was not ready for the opportunity for that. But, and this is part of what Mike talks about, and you can watch it more if you're interested.
Yeah, I'll definitely link it up in the show notes too.
Yeah. Something that I do now is I've watched way too many movies. I'm a huge avid movie person. Love mind thrillers, all that thing. And I like the idea of talking to yourself a little bit. Like, I just kind of, every time I come up against something that freaks me out, scares me, I have like an alter ego that goes, I dare you to do that. Kind of like a little kid on a playground. Like, that swing's too high. I don't want to go up there. It's like, well, I dare you. And that's kind of the game I play with myself, so that in the midst of all the fear and the anxiety and the worry, I do it anyway. And then sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But if I look historically, if we're only going to look at metrics and data, because we're developers here, give me the science. Over 83% of the time when I've taken a chance, it was a really good idea to take that chance. But at the moment, it is terrifying. Just like the idea of I like the idea of skydiving, but once you're up in that airplane, you don't want to jump out of the airplane. Everybody talks about it, which is why if you ever watch the videos, they're like, okay, on the count of 3, and they push them at 2. Like, they never get to 3 because they know that they're going to stop themselves because they're so afraid. But they say that within 2 seconds of jumping out of that plane, the exhilaration starts and you're like, this is amazing. I can see everything. Look at this. But, we like the idea of skydiving, but once we get up to the edge, it's scary. But once we're in the free fall and we're with somebody that's, taking a video of us, we're like, woohoo, then we're able to truly enjoy it. But you have to kind of trick yourself sometimes to just get off that ledge. And so for me, doing the job I do now, I've always wanted to be a developer advocate for years, since some of my closest friends are that job. And I just love teaching, and I like being able to bring back what the industry is doing back to the company and say, hey, this is the way that you could change the product because this is the way they're using it. I love being that double agent kind of mindset to where I'm just loyal to the developer experience, not just any one thing. I'm not a salesperson. I'm, I get to do both. And I worried quite a bit about jumping over that ledge. I was like, oh, what if they figure out I'm just not that great at stuff and I haven't done a whole lot of load balancing work. What do I do about this? The biggest one was I don't write a lot. I do videos. I like being in person. I'm a good speaker, but they want me to write blog articles a couple times a month. And I'm like, ooh, okay. I don't have any of the habits, which is really what this is about. I don't have any of the habits of this. So then I'll start doing it. I'm getting ready to release another article now. And the entire time this is going to be crap. They're going to figure out that I'm not good at this. And any moment they're just going to be like, well, thanks for playing, but we need someone who's actually good at writing. That always hits me. But I have not ever written. I have written articles before. They were not on any sort of a schedule, but I do know that they looked at those before they offered me this job. So, I had to, even with the evidence that says, well, they know all about what you're doing and they offered you this job. So why can't you just embrace that you belong here? It's a sense of, I don't really belong where I am. It's very like miscongeniality. Like I'm on the stage with all the girls, posing and stuff, but like I'm definitely from the Bronx somewhere, not, like Ms. America material, right? That's how you feel in tech right away, because all of us, we're surrounded by all these amazing, smart people. And instead of being inspired by them, like you could join them, you just kind of want to watch them. But that's really not how we get better at this. That's not how the world gets brought forward. And so you just got to get used to being uncomfortable with this.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think we, as a society, we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah. The whenever I do something that's slightly out of my comfort zone, like the first time I spoke at a conference, I did it because I really wanted to go to this conference, and my company wouldn't pay for it. And I was, a very green database administrator at the time. I didn't have much money. So I was like, all right, well, I'm going to apply to speak because I know speakers get to go for free, and they accepted me. I'm like, oh my God, now I've actually got to write the talk. Now I've got to figure it out. And I was like panicking. But then when I finished, a couple people said, hey, that was really good. I really appreciate it. And they started asking me more questions. And I was like, wow, maybe I can do this. And it kind of built up my courage a little bit more going forward. But at that moment when I got accepted, I immediately said, I got to decline. There's no way I can do this. And it's just those little building back on your history. I think that's kind of one of the things you mentioned, that if you look back on it, they read your articles before they offered you the job. So they knew you could do it. Therefore, you should know you could do it. But for something in our brain just keeps like saying, no, not exactly. How is it that you, other than daring yourself, what other tips do you have to get people over that fear, that anxiety, that initial thing that they're trying to do something new,
Well, I can tell you right now that it is vitally and crucially important that if you recognize that, contrary to whatever proof is there, not feelings, but proof is there, that you don't seem to accept it, that you start surrounding yourselves with people you respect that can give you actual feedback, that you will trust their opinion. Like if my mother tells me, oh, but you're like this amazing international tech speaker. And I'm like, yeah, Mom, whatever. How about I talk to like Kevlin Henney, who has spoken all over the world, and I've asked him occasionally for feedback on what I do. And he's just like, he came to my last talk in Lithuania and sat in the front row. And I'm like, great, this is this guy who is one of the best technical keynote speakers I know, like amazing guy. He's like watching Doc Brown from Back to the Future talk about the history of the way that, programming has kind of morphed, and you want to hear everything he says. And on top of that, he's got a British accent, he's got the whole thing going on, and he's sitting in the front row. And I got to do a brand. He was talking about how to brand yourself, like on social media as a developer, so that you're never out of sight, out of mind, because there's so many of us. How do you really market yourself? And so anyway, it was a talk about that. And at the end of it, I said, okay, what's the feedback? He's like, you killed it. So then it was up to me whether or not I accepted that feedback. But because of who he is, it absolutely helped move that needle for me, because he probably wouldn't waste his time lying to me, because he has nothing to gain by lying to me and just being fakely encouraging, So that is another way. You need to surround yourself with people that you respect and look up to get actual feedback. But make sure it's more than one, and not somebody that you work with. Because somebody that you work with is looking out for their own best interests on a subconscious level. So they're only going to respond to you about how hard or easy you make their life. Okay?
That's a really good point. And I think we, at least as I did when I was a developer, I kind of got away from thinking about the people that I surround myself with and started focusing just inwardly on myself and the things that I'm doing versus the people that are feeding life into me or getting things from me, and I didn't put as much focus on that as I should have. I think that's one thing we don't think about our network as much when we're, early on in our career as a developer or something,
Yeah, but it's crucial.
It's
crucial.
absolutely.
Like you will not, and if there's anything that anybody could take away from this, is that you will not get opportunities that you covet unless you network with people, because they just don't know you're alive. They don't know you're there. You could have been the person who like did everything at Amazon for like doing the course correction during that big moment where the site crashed during Black Friday, which is why they now do cloud computing, because they just couldn't handle the load. You could have been the guy who course corrected that, but because Amazon has buried you somewhere inside their company and you never get to go anywhere or do anything, nobody else knows about you. You would probably be an excellent person to write an article about load balancing or whatever, but unless you put yourself out there, nobody knows. If you don't go to a user group, then you won't even know people on a local level that if you're having a hard time at work, you can just go grab, a cup of coffee with and talk to them about it. You need outside perspective. And one of the biggest reasons you need outside perspective is that you can get serious PTSD from being at the wrong company, and you don't know it because the only people that you are surrounding yourself with are the ones you work with.
Right. You're put yourself into an echo chamber, basically.
Absolutely. And I, unfortunately, like a little less, like 40% of the places I've worked were very toxic and awful. Like that's very common, especially for the enterprise developer to accidentally stumble into that kind of a thing, because they tend to pay more to get and retain their people because the culture is awful, but they need developers, so they'll pay you a lot. And so some people will say, well, I just want the money. It doesn't matter. Over time, it will wear you down, and you'll start believing what is said to you with people who are not looking out for you or your growth. They're looking out for them because that's the way it is. Now, there is a difference between being, not getting the encouragement you need for growth and actually not being good at your job. But to be honest with you, nobody was born coding, and everybody has different holes. We are all Swiss cheese developers. My hole's over here, your holes are over there. There is no one person that knows all the things. So you have to take a little bit of the feedback with a grain of salt, and then maybe talk to people outside of your work and say, is this normal that I'm struggling this much? And maybe the answer is no, and there's some other things you can go do to supplement your knowledge. But oftentimes they're like, wow, that's a terrible way to run a project, or hey, that's not the kind of support you should be getting from your manager or from your coworker or whatever. And they'll give you an outside perspective because there are many different kinds of companies. Maybe you are a self-made developer and you just do a lot of consulting yourself. You know all the different kinds of people that can come to you, the difference between a good client and a bad client. But unless you reach out and connect with other people, and you can be completely not a people person and do this, because part of the reason I started programming, besides being fascinated, is that I didn't have to deal with all the people I did at Disneyland, at Marriott, at all of these retail companies, the influx of customers. I could just go code in my room. I liked that. But it's important that for your career and for you to understand where you are, you need to network. You have to do it. It's not an option really anymore unless you want to be forgotten.
I think that's a really good point. I know whenever I go to a conference, some people say, well, what sessions you're going to go to? They're really, it's like, I get most of my value for in between the sessions, when you're meeting
hallway
people
track.
and talking to, the hallway track. Exactly. And, I know and it's really important, I think, for people to tell you and for you to tell other people when they're talking about something to say, that's not normal, because for them, that is normal. That's their daily normal, is to get yelled at by their boss or to get told that they suck, and no, that's not normal. Your boss shouldn't do that. Good leaders don't do that. They try to build you up. They focus on your strength. They don't always point out your weaknesses and the things and to embarrass you. They're trying to build you up and help you. And to understand that it's really important. I think a lot of people might not realize that that's not normal. One of the things that you mentioned about getting known kind of in the community and meeting people. I've seen a couple of companies do this, but I wanted to see if you've seen other people do it where, in order to get promoted to certain levels, I think you can get to senior developer just being, by yourself. But one of the requirements that I've seen from some companies to get into a principal developer role is that you have to be known in the community for something that you do. And I think that's a really cool thing that they've added in to encourage people to get out there and to speak at user groups and to share their information and to help people out. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen that specifically, except for, of course, this role, which is a highly visible role. Being a developer advocate, you are community driven. However, I would say that I'm of two minds of that opinion, that some companies want to make sure that you have 10 years of experience broadly and not 1 year of experience 10 times over in just one thing. Because once you, honestly, I mean, it isn't even really senior. Once you pass a mid-level, you're kind of expected to be like this magician of thought. And you're supposed to, they expect you to bring to the table the right way or a different way to do things. Mm-hmm. But if you don't expose yourself to that, then you're not going to be able to bring it to the table. So while it's interesting that some people require that, I also think that's terrible, because then it becomes a little bit of a popularity contest, and I don't like that. I think that as long as you are in touch with the community and you have, a finger on, a little bit of a pulse on what the community is doing right now, what's coming out, it can feel exhausting, but I promise you that I time box it. And I say, this is the amount of time I will give today, or only on Wednesdays, or whatever it is, where I go out to my normal channels, whether it's Reddit or whatever, and I look and see what's happening. But part of that keeping my finger on it is I participate in a user group. And if you are in the middle of nowhere and you have no user group, there are online ones as well. And if you're not sure about that, start one. Mm-hmm. You will know, you will probably have at least one tech friend that talks to you about what they do. I have a tech friend who isn't in programming. They are an ISP tech admin dude. All right. But he knows all about building computers. And I just so happen to be getting ready to build a new PC. So, we talk about that. And because I know him and he knows me, he'll ask me all the time about, what is the best OS to run on this? Or what is the best program for this? Because I often know people who work at Spotify, who work at, Target or whatever, whoever's may be the vendor of these software programs. So I'm like, well, if I were to choose, I would choose this particular company for a tax product versus that company, because I know they're developers and I know the quality of the product they probably have. That's there's a little bit of give and take of the value you provide. And at first you'll feel like you have no value, but I promise you do. You'll be surprised. Just start somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think it's also super important, because to see other people's perspective, you have a perspective that you offer that nobody else has, based on, your upbringing, where you came from, the jobs you've had. And everybody else has that perspective too, that they can shine a light on something that you didn't even know was there. And I think that's really important.
So probably one of the biggest questions I could ask is, but Heather, I'm an introvert and I don't like people and I don't know how to make friends. And I'm like, well, this doesn't have to be a chum. You don't have to go have beers with them all the time. It's good to have somebody in tech that you can just, grab a cup of coffee with, that you can do that. But you can be an acquaintance with many people that are in tech. You just have to make the effort. One of the best ways to do that is to thoughtfully tweet something at somebody that you respect and follow. For example, in the .NET universe, there is a couple of different authors of very large, well-known, used libraries. And some of them are very active on Twitter. Some of them are active on Stack Overflow, like John Skeet. And all you have to do is just be like, hey, I'm interested in this. And sometimes it's a question that requires their energy and attention. But sometimes it's just you stating your opinion about something in a post on your blog, and then maybe posting about it and asking John Skeet's opinion, or tweeting at some and saying, hey, I wrote this thing. What do you think about it? So it's not always that you need them, that you need them to answer a question. Maybe it's just, hey, I have thought leadership I'd like to put into the universe. And what do you think of this? And that sometimes is a very low barrier of entry to start a back and forth conversation. And because you started that, then other people notice that you're talking with this person that's well known in the industry. And that's how you'll get, peripheral friends that will start talking to you a little more. And they tend to be the one who always chimes in and comments about this or that. It can be very organic, and it doesn't have to be something where you have to read, how to win friends and influence people. It doesn't have to be that way. Although I do recommend everybody get some sort of interpersonal skill going. some of the most brilliant developers I know are kind of stuck on this hamster wheel because nobody knows who they are. And again, you don't have to be famous. You just have to be visible. Just be visible. And once you start doing that, you will start being able to naturally gauge where you fall on the scale. Not just like, oh, I'm always bad at everything scale, but like if somebody were to audit instead of your resume, which doesn't matter, by the way, if audit your abilities and your skills, and somebody says, can you make a mobile app? Can you make a service? Can you write a console app? Can you do something for our pipeline that's CI/CD? If you can answer yes or no to these things, then you kind of understand already where your value is right away. Then you start just kind of cultivating it more and more. And you'll be able to see what other people are offering. And sometimes it will amaze you. You're like, wow, I don't know how you did this in like 2 weeks. Or, wow, this is such a complex and yet elegant solution. And you get really kind of fanboy about it. And it'd be really exciting. But it should only serve to inspire you, not to make you feel small. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes perfect sense. And I think some people will take it to make them feel smaller, though, because they'll think, well, I haven't done the things that this person has done, you know? So how can we change our mindset to not focus on that? I know I had I talked to AJ Jacobs just recently, and he was telling about gratitude. And one of the things he said is that he struggles with focusing on the one thing that went wrong that day instead of the 10,000 things that happened to go right, you know?
Well, that's a natural developer mindset because I don't get tickets in a system for doing the program right. I get tickets in a system for the bugs. So our minds are naturally tuned to where's the bug? I have to squash it. You know, like, I don't know if you ever went to Chuck E. Cheese or anything, but like,
and played the whack-a-mole.
The whack-a-mole game. Because it can be fun. It can be frustrating. It can be really embarrassing too, especially if you've done like this whole system, but yet, you know, people are stuck in this refresh loop and they can't seem to log in or log out. You know, those things can happen depending on your browser and all sorts of problems. And yet they ignore the fact that all this elegance went into this other solution where it's really fast and the load times are amazing and the cache works. And, you know, because all that, you know, you see is that you got the notification from, you know, whatever bug tracking system you have, right? Unfortunately, that doesn't work very well for how we track ourselves. I believe the more bugs, the better, because then I get to see all the things that I have opportunities to do. A lot of people say that they're not motivated and they don't have any drive. I do not think that you have passion. I think passion develops once you are practiced at something and you do something a long time. You either become passionate about it or you acknowledge that it doesn't do anything for you. So there's a deviation after you've done something several times. It's not necessarily like the 10,000 hours thing, but just once you really touch something more than just a few times and it starts to become more or less like just something that you can do naturally, you either love it or you hate it. Yeah. And when you love it, you call it passion. You know, when you hate it, you call it boring and mundane. And so depending on it, those passions just kind of show themselves to you once you touch them enough. But at first they are not comfortable and they're not cool. It's just really interesting how our brain works with all of that. Our minds are fascinating. Like the more that I dig into deep technical stuff, the more I realize that we make tech in our own image. And depending on how clear the mind was of that developer when they touched it, you will kind of see a little bit of themselves in it. I've discovered, like, the more that I go now, the simpler I make my code, because all I really need to do is X, Y, and Z. And instead of trying to future-proof things and make things 12 levels deep, and I'm not knocking abstractions, let's be clear. It's just sometimes it's really difficult to maintain. And if you think, I'm not just making this for me, I'm also going to have to maintain this. And then when I move on to a different position or different company, some junior, mid, senior person is going to come along and have to understand what I did. Now, the opinions that some high thinkers have is that, well, maybe they should just study longer and they'll understand what this is. It's that unless it truly is something groundbreaking to the point where it probably should become its own library, don't do that to people. Really software is communication, whether we acknowledge it or not. It's language. So if you don't really understand the language very well, then it's not going to be clear. It's going to be kind of hobbled together.
Yeah. I had a developer once that you just reminded me is at a different company. And I told him, I said, your code's really good, but you need to simplify it. It's too complex for other people to work on. He's like, well, hire smarter developers. I was like,
I know.
It doesn't work
There's a little bit of that, right? There is something to that. You want inspirational thinkers. And it's important to supplant at least one in your team somewhere that's like, hey, we could do this thing. And then it's also important to supplant a realist on the team that goes, yes, but they didn't ask for that. So that you meet somewhere in the middle and the whole team learns in both directions. But when it comes to how to deal, the original question was, and I have totally gotten off track. I apologize about that. I get really excited about this. How do you deal with, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Oh, goodness. I don't even know. I think it was like we were talking about, getting over that negative bias, I guess, that you have for yourself whenever you're connecting with
someone
greater,
folks. Someone more successful. So at first you're going to feel the FOMO. You're going to feel the fear of missing out a little bit, right? That's where that comes from. That's the keeping up with the Joneses mentality that we have in every aspect of our life. And it's human. It's not just a developer problem. It's, hey, this person is thinner. This person is more fit. This person has climbed Mount Everest and I have only climbed my backyard, all these things. So you will first feel the twinge of disappointment in yourself. Mm-hmm. And now much like anxiety, anxiety now, I just look at it as excitement. I'm like, I'm just really excited. I'm not nervous. I'm excited. That the way I look at the disappointment and watching somebody else, I go, wow, I felt something about the fact that they accomplished that or that they made this thing. Maybe I secretly have interest in that. And that should be the next direction that I look into, not just full bore. Just say, maybe I want to do something that impacts millions, or maybe I want to do something specifically in VR, which is the thing that they did. It should serve to be more or less of just a tap on the shoulder of opportunity. Like maybe this is something I would like to do because I feel disappointed that I didn't already do it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But there's a difference between, I think I'd like to do that if they disappeared. And I just want to belong. I just want to be as relevant and as loved and as respected as they are. That is different. And I struggle all the time with that. Before I die someday, I'd love to actually, make really a really big impact. Part of that can be selfish when you think about it, is that you don't want your whole life to be for nothing. But a lot of it is because I want to leave this place better than I found it. And I want to make sure I'm a part of a solution and not a problem, which is a healthy mindset versus I just want to belong. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I agree. I mean, I feel like I need to leave a legacy. I feel like I need to leave technology in a better place when it comes to leaders that, for my kids, if they want to go into technology than it was when I got there.
Amen. And that's an uphill battle, let me tell you. I thought that we were doing better. This past couple of years have been pretty rough. And there's been a big deviation of groups of thought. We are developers from all different walks of life, different genders, races, but mostly different walks of life. That is probably the biggest determining factor for how successful you're going to be in any job, right? Mm-hmm. If you came from nothing, this is one of the biggest wide open doors of opportunity. So if you came from nothing and you finally are able to support your family who's been there for you when you're at the poverty line, this is a game changing career that you can do. But maybe you come from a line of people who are always successful and have high profile jobs, maybe something in law, maybe something in medical, maybe something in real estate. And so to them, this is, well, of course, you got to do something, big. So this is no big deal to them. So the impact of what you accomplish has on you has a lot to do with where you came from. For me, nobody in my family is in technology. I'm the only one of all my sisters that works. I came from a very traditional family. I was not encouraged to go into STEM at all because of just the way we were raised. So my barrier of entry was harder, on top of the fact that I now have an ageism problem because I started later. And here I am in my mid to late 30s. And I'm like, well, now all of the people coming straight out of college that did the right thing right away, will I be relevant anymore? That can also really spike my imposter syndrome all over again, right? I mean, you can't take my experience away from me, but is my experience relevant anymore? Does anybody do web forms anymore? The answer is yes. But, kind of like jQuery. Do people still do jQuery? Actually, yes, they do. You'd be surprised. Do COBOL programmers matter anymore? Those kinds of questions start coming up that really tap on the door of the question, which is, how tied are you as a person to what you do for a living? That is a huge question that you should definitely take to a therapist or somebody and be like, if I lose this job, or I'm no longer relevant at this job, or, I can't really make that impact in the world that you were talking about, then I'm nothing. We also have a high suicide rate in our profession. Mm-hmm. And so how do we deal with this? That's the reason really that I started talking about imposter syndrome to begin with. It can lead there. But it's more that it tends to really attack people who are good at their job. It tends to attack them. It's something that really is kind of brought about by a combination of a toxic culture. We kind of, we're very competitive, about how good we are at something. I usually summarize it in the scene from the movie The Social Network, is that the way that they found their next intern is to see whether or not they could fix a bug while a clock was timing down. Every 30 seconds they had to take a shot, and whoever didn't do it was just a loser and just wasn't it's just interesting because the rest of the world doesn't exactly work like that. You can still provide value even if you aren't number one winner. But of course, we want to be number one winner, right? So it's really kind of rough. It's a rough industry to be in because we don't ever know where we stand because the board is moving. Mm-hmm. Everything is changing. Even in probably the specialty you've chosen. Mobile looks way different now than it did before. And the same thing happens to anybody who's working, selling stuff on Amazon or eBay. It looks very different. But instead of freaking out because you don't know where you stand, you should embrace it as an opportunity to put your foot on a new piece of the board that you weren't maybe relevant before, but you are now, because now it serves you. And it's always a season. It's always a time. So I know that sounds super deep. But I've thought about this because I've lost so many of people right around the mid to senior levels. They just leave our profession. What is it about that? You would think all the juniors would quit, but that's not what happens. Usually they stick in long enough to start being trusted with stuff, but then they screw up and they can't forgive themselves for screwing up. And then it's kind of this interesting, we haven't really built a very encouraging community. And especially over the past couple of years where there's been a spotlight on this person is only here because the company was given an incentive to hire a minority group and they don't really belong here. Those problems are present, or this person is no longer relevant because they're too old to do this job anymore compared to these bright young people coming out of college. There's a lot that's happening over the past couple of years that have really kind of gotten in the way of us kind of growing up a little bit more as a community. So the only way we can change that is grassroots. You have to do it person by person, user group by user group, and help that. So that's why it is so important who you surround yourself with, because I was dropped in the middle of a really toxic group and I did not flourish. But when I surrounded myself with the right people outside of my work, that really asked me, oh, have you seen this new thing that came out? Or hey, I really like this thing you wrote about, or you talked about, or we talked about the other day. Then your whole perspective on life changes and you're able to get more brilliant. You're able to actually activate those parts of your brain that fear and disappointment and frustration get in the way of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really good points. And I think one of the other things we can do whenever you said the grassroots movement of trying to change, the culture of developers or technology in general is to share the successes. And I know when, I had gone through a transition at my last company where they kind of reshuffled some stuff, and I acquired some people that I probably wouldn't have hired to begin with. They were a little bit older than the demographic that most web and mobile development teams have on them, and they didn't quite have the exact skills that I was looking for at the time. But they got put on my team, and we tried to work with them and figure it out. But it turned out that they had a perspective that we had never even thought about, and that's who our users are. Well, some of our users are going to be in the same situation that this person's at. And they were able to bring us insight to make our user interface so much better than it ever could have been if we just said, well, what's the coolest and greatest thing? This person said, well, try it this way because this makes more sense to me. And sure enough, that fit our demographic. That made our app so much more successful.
Absolutely.
And it's just one of the things that we wouldn't have found that if we didn't have a diverse team of people. And and another thing that I've seen when it comes to, you mentioned why people are kind of leaving the profession when they get to a certain age. Part of it is, at least what I've seen is that some companies, they want people to work all the time. They want you to always be on campus. We'll give you food. We'll give you this. We'll give you that. We want you always working. But then we get to a certain point in our lives where we have kids. And, I look at my schedule, and right now my daughter's got softball practice Tuesday and Thursday. My son's got T-ball on Wednesday. We've got games on Saturday. It's like, oh my gosh, there's all this stuff going on. Is this really the career for me? But then if you think about it, I know one of the things that I did is I put a hard stop on my boss. I said, hey, between the hours of 6 o'clock and 8:30, I'm not going to work. I'm not going to have my phone on. I'm not going to check emails. I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to be at home. And when I gave myself that limit, it gave me more time with my family. But also it meant that during the day, I've got to work a little bit harder because I know I'm going to be turned off at a certain point. And my work got better during that time. Yes.
So you touched on something really important. Two things. One of them is that you have to train people how to treat you. They don't know how to treat you because you're just, I'm a people pleaser, man. That's so many years in hotels. It does it to you. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll just do all the things. Yes, I'll just do all the things. And that's fine. Remember, there's more work to be done than you think there is to be done. And you have to have a hard step on you. Now, the only difference is if you're launching a product and it's like all hands on deck, those will happen sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. Maybe once a year it happened to me when I had several projects happen like 2 or 3 times a year. But if we had been smart about it, we actually set ourselves up to where we didn't have to like code for 48 hours straight. It wasn't that. It was more about, I see this as a problem. You know how we can fix these kinds of things? Having really good QA analysts, or maybe doing QA ourselves. Maybe setting up tests to run automatically, so we can just baby gate ourselves from that experience. But I'm sure every developer has had the stay overnight to 4 a.m. experience, right? That's one thing. The other thing that you touched on was the idea that because you had less time. It really wasn't less time, but we're going to go with it. Because you had less time, you had to become more efficient at the use of that time. I would suggest one day, just try one day. Instead of working an 8-hour day, tell yourself you have 6 hours, and that's it. And whether you leave at 3 or you decide to take a long lunch, just say, this is the time I have to do today. My tasks haven't changed, but this is what I have to do. You will find that the way in which you prioritize shifts, and it gets better and better. Remember, the value you provide is your output. Our value is our minds, right? They don't really care how we get there. They care that we got there. So almost every project I've ever been, they just want the thing. However you get there, you should do it as efficiently and smartly and automatically as possible so that you're using your precious amount of willpower and brain cells that is finite in the right area. And if you just say, well, I'll just work all day and all night and eventually I'll stumble onto this, that is one way to do it. And it's a good way to get burnt out. Or you can stop and say, hold on, maybe we can't do all the things, but what would be the 1 or 2 things that would bring the most amount of value today to what my effort is? Do those first. And then if the other things are things that you miss the mark, you will still provide like 80 to 90% of the value you provide to that job or project anyway, you know? And it's a lot more forgivable than missing the huge mark because you are exhausted and you start making mistakes after you've been up for 2-3 days. You know, I've learned the hard way exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, this has been great. I really appreciate you having you on and talking about this. How can people find out more about the things that you're working on and connect with you?
Well, I have a appearances list on my website if they're interested. So you just go to Coraline.com. So that's QUORRALYNE.com. I'm an avid Twitter user as well. And I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. I'm not a huge Stack Overflow person, but that is slowly changing. And of course, right now, if you're interested in any of the technical articles that I'll do, I'll be writing some tech for Okta. So definitely check out their blog. I work with 6-7 other developer evangelists from all different languages that are amazing. So please check us out.
All right, I definitely will. And I'll link all that up in the show notes as well. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hey guys, I hope you guys enjoyed that show with Heather. And if you did, please head over to iTunes and leave a rating, review, all those good things, and share with your friends. Share on iTunes, share on or through text messages or iMessage. Share it on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or wherever you share things. That would be very helpful to get more listeners and more people engaged in the show and hearing the message. I would greatly appreciate it. Have a good day.